Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to do a metagame update for patch 1.8, where we are going to be discussing a lot of the changes that have been brought about largely by the two changes in one, discrimination, and also in political movements, but also with a whole bunch of balance changes for the patch. The goal of this update is to be timely. We are releasing it just a little bit after the release of the game. I only have 50 hours due to having early access already played on this, and so I don't think it will necessarily be timeless, but we're trying to be timely. A lot of these things might change, but I'm trying to give as much of the information I can as it relates to the patch in order to kind of ease you into the patch and have some things to think about as it relates to kind of what more efficient play might look like. Alright, first up, we have acceptance, which is kind of a lot to unpack, so bear with me here, but it is no longer a binary system. The most important takeaway of this is the new system no longer requires any sort of level of acceptance that doesn't require any level of acceptance or discrimination or non-discrimination in order to allow for migration. So even if a pop is fully discriminated against in your country, it can still migrate to your country, or they, rather, let's humanize them. And so this is the biggest key feature, which unlocks kind of different ways of playing because it's not necessarily going to be multiculturalism. Now, for these levels, every 20 points worth of acceptance, if we come in here, is going to move you up the strata one kind of tick. So we have 0 to 19, 20 to 39, all the way up to 80 to 100. And okay? The way that you get these points are going to be from two sorts of systems. You're going to get them from your citizenship law, which is going to give a plus amount to everyone. So this plus 75 for extra culture, that's on everyone. The secondary kind of sources are going to be if you have a cultural trait or a heritage trait, it's going to give additional amounts. It's going to give additional amounts if you have both, and it's going to give a whole ton if you have primary culture. Everyone is going to have plus 100 acceptance from primary culture, so those will always be fully accepted. And the secondary source you can get is from church and state. You can get plus 15 base all the time from total separation, or if you are a little bit more religious, you can get plus 25 if you have the state religion, but minus if you don't have the state religion. And so that's going to sort you into the different tiers. The different tiers from there are going to give you a variety of bonuses or malices depending on where you are and whether or not you like to pay people wages, which I think is going to be one of the important things. What those bonuses and malices are, and this is a very key point, is going to change depending on the system you are using. So if we come into the citizenship law test, we will see on one end of the spectrum you have multiculturalism, which doesn't give a lot in the ways of bonuses and malices and is the least harsh towards the highly discriminated pops in your country. At the other end of the spectrum, you have ethnostate, which is going to be the most discriminatory and gives you a whole different flight of bonus and malices for your level of acceptance. In this, I think that there's going to be a few key things to focus on, which is the loyalism, right? Because it seems to be the case that you can generate a lot of radicals from high taxes, and it might be the case that doing something that allows you to have a lot more loyalists allows you to run higher taxes. We'll talk about taxes in a bit. The second one that I think is going to, or there's two other ones that are going to be important. Qualifications is going to be somewhat important, and I think wages is going to be important. There's a lot of different modifiers that seem to affect wages, and it's unclear to me whether you actually want to push for high wages or to push for low wages. There's a little bit of complexity in this argument, but if you're paying out in wages, you're not paying out to balance. Balance will get filtered through various free money modifiers, like laissez-faire's capitalist investment pool contribution efficiency. So if we take a look at a building, let's say, this one here, we have a weekly balance and we have wages. If we push up the wages, we will push down the weekly balance. And so it could be the case that you want to discriminate in such a way that you either increase or decrease wages. Pushing up the wages will tend to push up your SOL, all other things equal. And so the question is whether you care about the SOL push or the balance push. I do not know the case of which one of these you're going to be, but what this might inform is that if you want to push up wages and you have a lot of discriminated pops, national supremacy, for example, is going to give you systems where you are going to decrease wages, if you discriminate. So if you want to push down wages, specifically and push up the balance, it might be the case that national supremacy from an economics perspective is best. There's a secondary sort of consideration here, which is the disallow works in government buildings. This might significantly affect the metagame, specifically with there's a really important building that is good for going for if you're trying to play kind of a pushed run, which is the Forbidden City. You can't really employ this if you're on one of the really more discriminatory systems, because if you discriminate against all the Han people here, you can't employ it. And so working in government buildings is a little bit strange. I think they might hotfix it, but as of right now, this is a consideration as it relates to your level of discrimination. And so this is a thing to consider. I anticipate that if you are going to be really migrant heavy, I anticipate that generally speaking, accepting cultures is going to be better than not accepting cultures. And if you're going to be playing a country that's really migrant heavy, that moving towards multiculturalism is going to be probably best. And if you are playing a country that is extremely, you have a ton of pops already, and they're all accepted. So I'm thinking Japan, China, and kind of those two specifically. I think national supremacy is probably going to be best, and then maybe not going ethno-state for the explicit reason that it's going to be difficult to employ government buildings like ports overseas on ethno-state, whereas national supremacy, you can kind of get it done. Importantly, getting over the +20 threshold is going to be a bit of a big deal, and so there might be some sort of metagame where you want to go state religion if you are going ethno-state, so you can bring pops to cultural erasure if they convert to your religion, because if a pop is the accepted religion, just that alone will give +25. But if they are, just total separation, you only get +15. There's an additional +5 you receive from being in a homeland. So if you did go total separation and ethno-state, which I think gives 0 value from acceptance from culture, just 0 base acceptance, then if they're in their homeland, they're still going to be able to get onto, at the very least, the first level here. But I think under ethno-state, that it might not be enough for them to work in government buildings. We have to come in here, highlight this tooltip, disallow work in government buildings for cultural erasure status. So you would have to get them up to +40 in order to work in government buildings. I believe they have since changed this to be specifically in the middle and upper strata kind of pops, but this is going to greatly affect things. I'm not sure exactly where things go. I think there's a lot of experimentation that could be done, but in terms of citizenship law, it's gone from being you absolutely have to pass multiculturalism to now it's pretty open within the new system. Assimilation also works differently now in that you can only assimilate to other pops with which you share a heritage group, and there's a very interesting one in the Sephardim culture. This is the only race that's like this, making it the best race in Victoria 3, but it actually has two different heritages. It has Middle Eastern heritage, and it has European heritage, and what will happen is you will assimilate towards the most accepted heritage, or the most accepted culture, in this case Sephardim, with which it shares a heritage trait. So in the case of Sephardim, they can, assimilate your other cultures with European culture to Sephardim, and then if your primary culture is, let's say, Turkish, you could then subsequently, since now you have Middle Eastern heritage, assimilate up into Turkish. So this is an interesting bridge religion, but for the most part, the thing you need to know is that you need to share a heritage trait in order to assimilate as well, and this is just kind of a neat little thing. It's the only culture in the game like that. The next new mechanic that is going to be really important is going to be political movements have changed from just a sort of system that's only reactionary to a single law pass to persistent political movements. Now, these movements can spawn in a couple of different ways. They can spawn by you conquering territory. They can spawn just by kind of having some base stuff. For example, our Han national movement is because we took Han provinces. But the most important one for you as a player is going to be technology. A lot of new technologies will unlock the ability for new movements to spawn or unlock new movements. In this case, political agitation has unlocked for us, our ability to get the fascist movement here. For each movement, there's going to be two values that are important. The support, which is how many pops are currently supporting the movement. That's kind of intuitive. And the activism, which is roughly translates to how mad the movement is, how upset they are. Radicals will contribute to this. And if we take a look and scroll down, we will be able to see their core ideology, what they care about. This is kind of a complete outline. So the fascists want to pass all these things. And if we take a look at activism, we can see a rundown rundown of what is making them upset. And you see, for example, we recently enacted multiculturalism. They're upset about that because that is the law that they oppose, and this is going to be one of the axes upon which they start to get mad. They start to attract, kind of people, in particular the separatist movements, or like our Han movement, is going to be particularly, it was particularly active for a very long time, because it had a lot of radical supporters, because they were discriminated against and they were having issues, because we didn't accept them for an extremely long time, and they kind of only cared about one issue. But moving forward, if we just take a look at this fascist movement again, when they are going to have high relevancy or high support, there are going to be some important breakpoints as they relate to effects. Because of this, I think that it's going to be very important to bolster movements you like or suppress movements you don't like, and this is going to be a key aspect of kind of the metagame, which is going to increase the value of authority quite a lot. Especially if you want to have, two of these, you're going to need to have at least 500 authority. We'll talk about it more in a little bit, but I think this makes the sovereign empire a whole lot better, because the easiest and best kind of source of authority is going to be vassalization principle, but also this is going to increase the value in a way that is a little bit oblique of all the laws that are generally more regressive, that give you authority, like autocracy, ethno-state, and the like. But coming back to this movement to talk about what effects we are getting from the combination of support and also activism. If the support is sufficiently high, I believe if it's over 10%, what we will experience is pressure on interest groups. And this is going to dramatically affect stuff down the road for you, because what this is going to affect is it's going to affect what ideologies your different interest groups can roll. So in this instance, we know that the fascism is pressuring the industrialists, and we can see that our chance of rolling ideologies is going to be very, very heavy into ethno-nationalist as a result of this. And so not only is our movement going to help us to pass particular laws, we'll get to that in a second, it's going to allow us to get characters that allow us to do this. Now, this chance of roll is both when the character disappears and also on generals when they appear, these types of things. We can scroll down the bottom here and we can see all the movements that are in particular exerting pressure. These are all the movements that are eligible to exert pressure. We do see that it is, it's not actually 10%, it must be 5% here. We're still learning, but it is, if I am not mistaken, the amount of support that they have that is required to get activism. Now, this is important for some character interactions that do require political movements be exerting pressure, like you have to, in order to exile someone, I believe you have to have an exertion of pressure or something to this effect, but various character interactions are going to be affected by this, and you can see them in the breakdown. Coming back to what we're doing, once the agitation is sufficiently high, I believe the value is 25%, it might be 20%, so once the pops are sufficiently upset, it is going to be easier for you to pass laws, because every law that they support, the movement will give you success chance and also give you stall chance towards these laws. So this is going to greatly affect your ability to pass stuff or hinder your ability to pass stuff, in that, especially if you line up having, one of these characters that you've forced into place, like let's say we have an ethno-nationalist and then we have a strong agitating movement, then we will be double dipping and you can get extremely high success chances, and also you can get extremely high stall chances as a result of these movements. And there might be interesting moves to kind of make as a result of this. In particular, we are playing the USA. We are planning on going fascism, and the plan has always been to go fascism. And you might say, hey, why are you multicultural? Well, it is much easier for us to pass ethno-state after passing multiculturalism, because now we have really, really upset the particular movement and forced them into being relatively agitated, as it were. So if we take a look at the fascist movement, they are agitating currently in large part because the multiculturalism was recently enacted. We have also been bolstering them. We haven't bolstered them right now in order to increase their support, and so this is going to help us to get characters in place that will help us to do these. In particular, you might notice the authoritarian, you might notice the corporatist, which I don't think supports fascism specifically, but is kind of one of the similar ideologies or in this right vein and this type of thing. So we used first our movements, our various movements like the Han National Movement, to help us to pass multiculturalism, or the separatist movement. One of these guys had support in particular for multiculturalism. Maybe it just disappears when you currently have it. But we use them to pass that movement, and now we're going to sway back the other way, which gives this interesting reactionary sort of feel. Another thing that's of note when passing laws is that your groups will always contribute to stall chance, whether they're in government or not, but they will only contribute to stall chance if they are upset. You can see here our trade unions oppose us going on to wage subsidies, but it actually will not give any sort of stall chance, even though they oppose it, because they are sufficiently happy even after we are passing it. They are +5 happiness that they will not oppose it. This might lead to interesting sorts of plays where it is actually easier to go into compulsory primary school if you go from child labor allowed to restricted child labor, let's say, because the industrialists will generally dislike both of these things, but if you can keep them +5 happiness when you're enacting restricted child labor, and then wait the cooldown for them to tick down and how unhappy they are, and then pass compulsory primary, you can, in doing this, avoid stall chances. Also, if they are extremely upset, they will add extra to stall chance. And so stall chance is now affected by how happy your interest groups are, and so if everyone starts getting really upset, your entire ability to pass any sort of laws will get really bogged down, and if everyone's really happy, then you can push through things very, very easily. Your ability to manipulate politics with generals and admirals is now incredibly diminished on kind of two fronts here. The first front is you cannot retire a general or a commander until they've been serving for a year, and so you cannot cycle through commanders repeatedly for an extended period of time in order to get something exactly how you look, although you can still recruit specific ones, and then ones whose clout you want to promote those, and not promote ones whose clout you do not want to promote, and just keep on uncovering new generals until you find, in particular, generals of groups that you are going to want to support. But the second thing is that in order for them to roll into being a general, so for example, we might want petite bourgeoisie, so we promote these. In order for them to roll into being a general, however, they have to have served for 10 years. So this means if you want to try and set up situations where particular ideologies are going to get in power, you have to do them 10 years ahead of time. So this either means you're not going to use this as a tool, or you have to do it extremely proactively, but you cannot do it reactively to a particular political situation, or immediately after getting a certain political situation in order to pass something. Instead, you will have to rely more on movements, and also movements are going to inform which generals it is that you can roll in the first place here. Like, for example, on the petite bourgeoisie, we can roll jingoists, traditionalists, or corporatists. We can't roll something like a republican right now, even though we're on oligarchy, and if we wanted to move in that direction, what we would have to do is we would have to come in, and perhaps the liberal movement, who likes distribution of power systems that are voting, we would have to maybe try and bolster them. I don't know if they are eligible to pressure the petite bourgeoisie, but this is an example of a different group that it could potentially pressure. So if we look at our industrialists, we will see that, hey, there are chances of rolling a Democrat or a Republican kind of leader, and so if you want to manipulate stuff through generals specifically, you're going to have to do it a little bit more proactively than you would otherwise, but generally speaking, and I mean generally, this tool is much weaker, and instead you are going to have to rely on political movements in particular to push things through. revolutions work a little bit differently. I don't have a full picture because we haven't experienced a lot of revolutions, but in particular, they are going to be a lot more proportionate to the amount of support that is received. I don't even see where this revolution in particular is on the map. They might be overseas, something like that. I don't know where they are at. But they don't have a lot of support. If they have the support of the armed forces, this juices them up a lot. But perhaps the most significant change as it relates to metagame is revolutions can now take your capital. Since they can take your capital, just stacking a whole bunch of military in your capital is no longer an effective way of being able to always beat the revolution. But also, on the other hand, the revolutions that have really small movements are super inconsequential, with the exception of people being able to sway against you. And so you can be free to kind of squash the smaller revs, but then the bigger revs are really a lot spookier because there's not as much you can do to set yourself up so that you can ensure that you necessarily have a bigger military, although since you're more handsome than the revolution, you'll still probably be able to win anyways. There are several new changes to laws. A lot of them are really small, but there are also the addition of a couple new laws. In particular, corporate state has been introduced. This is presidential in nature. Other than it being presidential in nature, I think it's probably better than council republic. It's probably one of the better laws, and I don't know how bad. When you can manipulate the IG leader very, very easily, parliamentary republic's extremely strong because you can put exact leaders into power very, very easily. If this power is taken away from you, I don't think that parliamentary's advantage over presidential republic is as big as it is before, which might make corporatists or corporate state the most powerful governing principle because it allows you to have a relatively high legitimacy while also raking in 100 authority. Generally speaking, monarchy's problem is it doesn't really allow you to have high legitimacy. This does not seem to be the state of affairs with corporate state. In fact, it seems maybe even a little bit better than council republic, but I'm not 100% sure whether the government size allowance and legitimacy from ideological incompatibility is worth more than the plus 10. My feeling is that it was, but this is based on an extremely small sample size. Also, citizenship, as we mentioned, does affect exactly what discrimination does. Again, I'm not sure which ones of these are best, but this is something to take note of in your games and decide accordingly. We'll probably take a closer look at this later. Also noteworthy is there has been a small buff to professional army, that it gets more experience gain, I believe is the one. This seems relatively minor. I don't think that it's going to substantively affect things. There was a rework / change to public education versus religious schools and private schools in that there's a minus bureaucracy cost of education on private schools. There's also a minus smaller cost on on religious schools, and public schools have gotten buffed slightly, giving 2.5 additional education access per level for 62% education access instead of 50 at max level. Now, as far as metagame goes, I still think public schools is probably best. I think this makes religious schools more reasonable if you're somehow leaning into the devout. I think because I don't know exactly how valuable the decreased cost is, right? But in terms of proportionate to the cost, it's the same proportion, but it's a little bit leaner. I suppose if you're wanting that institution, you are probably going to be of the opinion that public is slightly better, but an interesting one is private. Now, private schools is generally not very good because it gives wealth for education access. You already get this a couple levels effectively of this through technology, and generally the pops that are extremely wealthy hit 100% literacy anyways, in which case giving them additional literacy doesn't do anything because it doesn't overflow and be over 100% literacy. But why I think this is interesting is bureaucracy cost of education. In particular, I don't know how it stacks with the power block principle of advanced research of minus bureaucracy cost of education, but if this stacks additively, you can bring it down to 10% cost, which is interesting. I don't know if it's good, but this is something to think about. Healthcare has a similar sort of effect where it is going to be decreased in cost for the charity ones, and is going to be, decreased further for the private health institution. I think this petite bourgeoisie political strength was not here before, and public health insurance also has gotten buffed slightly by giving more minus mortality per level instead of, I believe it was 4 per level, now it's 5 per level, if I'm not mistaken, which I very well could be. Well, actually, I read through the patch notes and this is the change. I just don't know what the value is, but it has more minus mortality than it did before. Also notable is internal security and everything across the board that relates to radicals from standard living changes. Pretty much everything. I think bankruptcy is maybe the only one that was once radicals from standard living changes is now radicals from political movements. I don't know if this is better because guaranteed liberties now used to be really meta for developing a bunch of loyalists for the purposes of raking in bonuses. In particular, you would pursue with a lot of approval, this type of thing. The radicals and loyalists from political movements seems not as strong. This requires a lot of testing. I haven't tested enough to know how good this is. Notable on National Guard is that it does affect harvest conditions. We'll talk about those. And Secret Police seems to be very, very good at suppressing stuff. Another content creator who experimented a little bit more with it than me felt that if you go to Secret Police level 5, this effectively turns off entirely political movements. Whether that's good or bad is a little bit unclear, given that you can use political movements to pass a lot of stuff you like. The fact that it locks you in on something is maybe a bad thing, or it's a good thing, depending on what it is that you are interested in. The other second law that has been introduced, that is a new law, is extraction economy. In particular, I don't think it's very good to pass yourself. This decreased investment pool contribution, I am not 100% sure. Someone pointed out, we talked about this briefly, where we talked about this being multiplicative. This might be additive. If this is additive, it completely turns off aristocrat investment pool contribution. We didn't think it was additive because we were seeing some contribution from manor houses, but as the user pointed out, that could be entirely from the devout portion or the religious folk portion ownership. But what this, for the most part, does is it makes it so that your subjects don't get any investment pool. You turn this on in your subjects. You don't do it for yourself because investment pool is a very strong effect. And it also turns up agriculture, extraction, and plantations, and then you build in their country a whole bunch of stuff, and this is good for you. I think that this is a little bit interesting. It makes any sort of mechanism that you're using to pass laws in your own subject countries a bit better. If they are kind of the second tier of whatever track they're on as far as subject go, if they're on the second one, you can try and force them to pass the extraction economy. And I believe if they're loyal, they will always have 10% success chance because they are a puppet here. I think they have to be loyal. I'm not 100% sure. You can see the stall chance. This makes creative legislature a little bit better in terms of the power block system, because I think passing your subjects onto this is going to be particularly useful. Did our game lag out? So, as we were saying, a creative legislature, the minus enactment stall chance, applying to all block members is a little bit more intriguing, especially because you can stack up a whole ton of stall chance yourself, and so this might allow you to make different sorts of moves than you would otherwise be able to do. And there might be phases in the game where you slot this in at like level 3 or even level 1, just for a brief period of time, and then look to swap it out. So you store up 3 mandate, you swap in creative legislature level 1, so you can have all your subjects try and pass this particular thing. You generate another mandate, and then you swap creative legislature out for another level 3 thing. It does give this increased and decreased political activism as well from disapproval and approval enactment. This might also be substantive. It's hard to evaluate this because I don't know exactly how the feel is of the movement activism and these sorts of things, but this is one to maybe keep an eye on as a result of the extraction economy law being one that putting it on your subjects is particularly powerful. Finally, welfare actually does something if you don't have unemployed pops now, in that it gives a little bit more food security. This is a bit of an interesting mechanic. I think that food security is probably something that's worth watching. If you come into the markets tab and you look through food security, you can see at places that are experiencing some level of mild starvation, which you can see if we hover here is a very significant penalty to both birth rate and mortality. And so we can go through the interface and look for states of ours that are experiencing some degree of mortality and starving. Here you can see 26% of our pops are starving. And the way to address this is to provide more of the food in that area, as far as we can tell. See, we don't have a shortage in here. Also, a higher proportion of their food, or of their income that is going to food, the more sensitive they will be to food price. But what we could do is try and decrease food price in this area. This has a bunch of downflowing effects if you're going to be playing whack-a-mole kind of with starvation, in that it is going to make actively building some of these industries in small amounts in key locations. It's going to make it a lot more attractive. But also, in order to avoid this malice, it is going to make putting in welfare a little bit better than it was previously, because very often what it did previously, it was a whole lot of nothing unless you had unemployed pops. But then if you had a lot of unemployed pops, you didn't exactly want to pay out that much welfare anyways. So it's very often you just enacted it at level 1 for the purposes of approval of interest groups. Now it has a little bit more teeth to it, in that it is also going to help you with any sort of food security issues. So, if it is the case that you want to intentionally depress wages, I think it's worth noting that there's a possibility that slavery is meta. I really have no reference experiences for this, because I have such little experience with using slavery. One of the major reasons you didn't go slavery, though, is you couldn't go slavery in multiculturalism, but now if multiculturalism isn't a must-run, then slavery is kind of back on the table. It's back on the menu, boys, and it might be meta if, in particular, you want to drive up the balance as much as possible and pay as low wages as possible. So harvest conditions are now a thing. To be honest, I don't think paying attention to it is extremely important. Some of them are particularly nasty. Flood seems to be the worst. And what it gives is it gives minus mappy in addition to a whole bunch of negatives that are kind of present on a lot of these other ones. You can see the flood is giving minus mappy, minus throughput, extra goods consumption cost, whereas something like a drought is not giving that minus mappy and is not giving as much minus infrastructure. There's also positive ones as well. As far as this affects any sort of metagame, it does make authority slightly better, because I do think that it is a bit strong to play a little bit of whack-a-mole with the emergency relief decree, in particular in epicenters of these events. It's going to be relatively strong. The modifiers it's giving is pretty strong. The extra market access price impact, the minus tax collection will, as far as I know, the minus tax collection is not a negative money modifier, but if it's collecting less taxes, this is going to help them preserve SOL, stop them from being food insecure. It also gives plus food insecurity. The additional infrastructure and MAPI, even if there is no MAPI penalty, is also going to significantly offset these effects. And so I think this decree is pretty strong towards that end. But other than that, I don't think you need to think too much about these events. The only other thing which I'm not very sure about is if certain harvest conditions are more common in some parts of the world, then this might inform to some degree where you want to build, but I don't think that that's too big a concern. I think what resources are appearing where is going to be a way bigger concern than anything like that, or how much pops you have for the most part, but this is just a little bit of a new mechanic that is present in the game, so I thought I'd touch on it. Finally, there is the presence of companies having specific locations and companies having way stronger modifiers but not having full market share. This has gone through a couple changes. In the early access version, it was extremely anemic. Now they seem to have buffed it. It's unclear to me how strong the buff is at this point in time because I haven't played enough with it being buffed, but broad strokes, the way it's going to work is they are going to build in specific locations and they are going to get their construction bonus and also their own throughput bonus, and it's going to be way bigger than before. Before it was like a 20% bonus for the throughput and a 35% bonus, I think, for the construction. This is considerably stronger, but if we kind of take a look at our buildings, we saw that there was some little over 100 buildings in the steel mills, and now we can see that there, in total, we have 200 steel mills. The thing to look at, or the number to look at, and it seems to be the case that this is how it's performing now, is if it is over, I think it's roughly 40% market share, then the company will be more valuable than it was before. If it's under 40%, then it'll be less valuable than it was before, as it relates to company throughput bonus and construction bonuses. In the very early access version, it was completely anemic and they never acquired market share. If that is the case moving forward, which it doesn't seem to be moving forward, the metagame for evaluating companies is going to be dramatically different than it was before, in that you do not care what the industries are so much as long as the industries can get the productivity bonus. What you instead really care about is whatever their prosperity bonus is. We played most of this run with a situation where that's what we were caring about, so we slot in 2 canal companies, we slot in the company for railway building throughput, although Standard Oil is excellent on the other front as well. We got state construction efficiency. It was only recently that the game had gotten fixed, and we had slot out the canal company, because 50k free income is much better. For a very long time, we were stuck at 5 to 10 levels on the steel in Pennsylvania, and it was becoming a smaller and smaller market share. Notable in this, though, even though it seems like it's been buffed, and the situation is now that companies you probably want to evaluate much similar way as you did before, which is that you really care about what industries they have. When you slot in a company really late in the game, it's going to take a really long time for them to ramp up, and they're not going to be providing their bonuses immediately. I don't know how to evaluate this. It might be the case that when you get into late game companies, you evaluate primarily based on what's their prosperity bonus in the later game. And also, slotting out companies and swapping companies is going to be particularly bad. But also, with these companies, if you build it, you do not get the construction bonus. They have to build it to get the construction bonus, which creates a play pattern, which I'm not a fan of, because it's very counterintuitive. If you slot a company in, you probably really want to avoid actively constructing that company yourself, it's because you want the auto queue to build the company up. And I'm not entirely sure how this affects metagame, but it's probably going to be something to the effect of, if you slot in an iron company, you probably want to build like exclusively wood and coal and tools yourself with your active construction, and let the auto queue pick up all iron, and never build iron yourself ever at any point in time, because you want the company to be able to benefit from its construction bonus. Similarly, if you slot in the wood company, you probably never want to actively build wood, and you just build iron, and you just build everything that is inputs for these companies. Again, I think this is really counterintuitive. I don't think this is a good play pattern, but if you slot in a company which you're trying to specialize in, you in some sort of sense don't want to build it, and so what you instead want to do is either you probably want to build the inputs for the thing. So in this case, building steel, rubber, and coal, if we have a tool company, would be sensible. That way we're encouraging the tools to get constructed, but not only that, but also building the industries that consume the particular good that you have an industry for, to make them more profitable. As they're more profitable, they will invest more, and so you're trying to massage these to invest more in the industries. It's a little bit kind of a strange way of looking at things. I think I kind of prefer 1.7's situation on companies, but I think that this is what the metagame looks like, assuming that, again, we are getting a high enough market share. The thing I would check is if in your games, companies are getting like over 40% of the total share of companies or of industries in your country, then it's probably going to be worth it to slot in companies on the basis of industry as you did before, because the bonuses are pretty substantive. If it's way, way, way below that, then again, you go for prosperity bonuses. As a sort of general metagame, the bankroll metagame is just like dead, because what now the bankrolls get capped at is, I don't think we're receiving a bankroll currently, we're receiving war reparations, but bankrolls are capped at 10% of the income of the country that is sending the bankroll, which means you cannot juice up these enormous bankrolls. It's also kind of dead in the sense that if you're already receiving a bankroll, there's a penalty towards being able to get another bankroll from another country, but this means you can't uber juice bankrolls anymore, and so the entire warping metagame of doing every sort of thing that you can possible to generate as many bankrolls as possible, because bankrolls are just like worth more than 5 to 10 states. You'd rather take a bankroll off of France than 3 states off of France. This is now seems much, much less the case, because the ceiling of the value of the bankroll is incredibly low. In the early game, bankrolls will still be good, and if your economy is smaller than the person who will be bankrolling you, it's still going to be good. This opens up the possible metagame of a war reparation metagame, in terms of what it looks kind of meta. Now, I do not like this meta. this meta has been proposed in the past. One of the very early Vic3 content creators was a huge fan of this meta. Like, we're talking like 1.1, 1.2, where the idea is you just peel war reparations off of every GP as best you can, and China, and that this is a source of income. War reparations are equal to the current cap for bankrolls. And so what the metagame might be, the bankroll is probably still good enough to pursue, but I think what the metagame might end up being is you look to ally with either France or Great Britain, and actually like ally with them because they are useful as allies. France might be slightly more useful. Britain, you might have to, Britain might, I don't know which one's more useful, between the two of them. It might actually be Britain, but the idea is you align yourself with one singular great power, and you try and get a bankroll from them. France being more useful because you're more likely to get a bankroll off of France, Great Britain being more useful because they'd be more useful as an ally. And then everyone else who's a GP, the metagame might be that you just want to rotate through humiliating and in particular taking war reparations off of them. Now, it's kind of hard to land France relative to other GPs, but it's doable. It's kind of hard to land Austria, but it's doable. Germany, it's a little hard to land. Great Britain's probably the hardest to land. USA should be easy to land if they get to the other coast. The important thing being you need to occupy an incorporated state in order to enforce war reparations. Russia is just super easy. Russia, you just land up here every time. It's super easy to get war reparations. This is incorporated. They never defined Siberia ever in the history of ever. And so you can, on cooldown, war reparation, humiliate Russia. This is probably relatively meta, because your upside of being able to get a bankroll off of Russia is now no longer there. And even if it is there, or, well, like, you can get a bankroll off of them, but it'll never be worth more than the war reparations, and so you could just go for the war reparations plus the humiliate, and so this will be kind of change things up quite a bit in terms of, like, the overall metagame. It's not a new feature, but it's effectively a new feature, which is forced nationalization now no longer scales with population. Instead, it just seems to be a flat rate, and then it is modified by whatever power status you have and or any other modifiers you have that pertain. In this case, if for us to force nationalize on France, it only costs 5 infamy. This combined with just general kind of reduced infamy costs over the course of like since 1.7 mean that I think it might be reasonable to trade investment rights and then force nationalize later. I don't really know. You could try and figure out exactly what the value of that is by multiplying the number of buildings by the cost of nationalization for yourself, this type of thing, and then compare it relative to them bankrolling you. I haven't done any sort of this evaluation. I imagine this is moderately strong, but I don't really have a frame of reference, but this is something to keep an eye out for. There are a couple other new things, though, that we kind of just realized about, the first of which is going to be military assistance. Now, military assistance is going to be something you do not want to give out yourself. Extra military goods cost is a negative money modifier. It increases the amount you are paying for your military goods without adding any additional buy orders. And because no additional buy orders are added, it doesn't stimulate the economy when you're spending more, which is generally a bad thing. That being said, minus military goods cost is a free money modifier because it is reducing the amount you're paying without decreasing the buy orders, so prices still stay high, so the economy is still stimulated. And this is an interesting thing. It might be the case that playing around, getting a bunch of military assistance, stacking these modifiers, because they stack additively, stacking these modifiers with stuff like the company bonus from generic explosives is also going to give minus 10%. Stacking multiple of these modifiers, here we have minus military goods cost, like out a ton, is potentially really, really strong. They have to have more army power projection than you in order to put this in. This means that it could be the case that, you know, you want to have a really low army power projection. I'm not sure all the ways you can manipulate your army power projection low. You could run just irregulars and then have them be using a bunch of military goods. I'm not sure. I think conscripts don't count unless they're conscripted up, but you could just run conscripts. You could also just build a ton of navy. I don't know if the requirement also counts in navy, these types of things, but this is opened up with trying to collect multiple of these, and stacking these might be a thing you could do. You also get some other modifiers that are kind of relevant but not economically relevant. Weekly unit experience gain, both sides get this. Training rate is a particularly strong modifier, especially in multiplayer. Trading these around to your allies might be something that's reasonable to do. We get extra leverage and also technology spread for military. Tech spread is of course very strong, and so this is an interesting one. I don't think you want to use it proactively to try and juice someone up, but you can try and receive these yourself and do these types of manipulations. This is something we have to experiment with. We're probably going to do a China run where we try and stack as many of these as possible, because China, even without this, has access to, I believe, 65% military goods cost reduction if you stack every one of these modifiers, because they have armed forces. Their armed forces in particular gives -30, and then there's 35 available through other means. This is an interesting thing, and I think it's worth pointing out. Also very, very strong is the Request Power Block Embassy interaction, which is going to give you, the very, very key point why it's strong is it's going to cost 0 diplomacy, and instead it is your ability to get it is kind of increased or decreased by your cohesion, as well as some other modifiers that you can see here. Cohesion's a big source of why we are able to get this, in addition to attitude, these types of things. But this is going to give us 400 leverage. For reference, guaranteeing independence gives 200 leverage. This is an enormous amount of leverage, and it's going to give us taking positive relations. This is absolutely huge in a couple ways, and it affects metagames in a couple ways, especially as it relates to blocks, which we're going to talk about next. But namely, you can increase relations with guys really easy without needing to spend Diplo. The value of Diplo goes down. In particular, one of the hardest reasons, or one of the reasons Sovereign Empire was maybe not necessarily the very best block type, was it was really hard to pull people into your block so that you could then subjugate them. If you can get 400 free leverage, it suddenly gets a lot easier. And so these are going to be very, very significant towards those ends as far as, interactions go. As we alluded to or explicitly mentioned earlier, I think Sovereign Empire is probably just the best power block now for a lot of reasons that are going on. It's easier to subjugate other people is a big one, but I think the biggest one is that the one that it was kind of competing with in terms of power block, if we take a look, it was Trade League, and I don't think Trade League is necessarily very good at all now, for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being, the main reason it was really good was because external trade was really, really good at playing into the bankroll meta. Because getting as much Diplo as possible, it gave you the most opportunities as possible to get a bankroll, and bankrolls were just so disgustingly good that setting up a situation where you would be having good relations with every single GP throughout the entire game always was extraordinarily strong. If the metagame is now humiliate and war rep GPs, not only do you not really need the extra Diplo for the ones that you're going to rival and then humiliate war reps on cooldown, you will also be receiving a bunch of Diplo from the rival itself. A big part of the external trade strategy involved having no rivals, the bankroll maxing strategy, or having just one rival, and now if you're going to have a whole bunch of rivals, external trade might not even be good, let alone like the best. On top of that, internal trade really doesn't look that good, and the main reason the Trade League was attractive was because their primary principle was particularly good, and the reason internal trade doesn't look that good is because the big thing on that is company throughput bonus, but company throughput bonus is maybe half the value it used to be, because companies naturally are getting bigger amount of throughput, proportionally it's a smaller bonus, and they're owning a smaller share of the buildings, so that throughput is getting applied to a smaller share of buildings, and so Trade League seems really not too good. Ideological Union might be considerably better, but it wasn't very good before. Military Treaty is good when you turn and burn and you go high infamy, but that's I mean, it's still meta for that specific purpose. I suppose because Trade League is worse, it like also rises up, especially if you find yourself in a position where you don't have monarchy, so you can't go sovereign empire. Religious convocation, we want to take a closer look at. Divine economics was changed. In particular, it increases wages for state religion pops. If plus wages are good, because they allow you to run higher taxes, we'll talk about that in just a second, then divine economics actually might be really strong. This is kind of hard to evaluate, I'm not really sure, but this kind of brings us back to, to some degree, sovereign empire. I think vassalization is really good, and I think it's better, because I think bolstering and suppressing, to be fair, ideological union has one of these that gives a bonus to bolstering and suppressing, ideological truth. But if bolstering and suppressing is better, and if you want to have excess authority as well for putting down, the decrees for making the harvest conditions not as bad, then vassalization is way better than it was previously. It was already really good, but this is the fact that it's a lot better is really significant, because you have to take one of these primary principle groups. This is probably the best primary principle group now. Principle is vassalization, whereas before it was external trade. And on top of this, with this new subject interaction, you can now get a bunch of, free or virtually free power block embassy, or you get free leverage. So it's way easier to pull people into your block. But also, if the metagame is revolving around war reparations, which I don't know if it is, but if it is, then you have a ton of Diplo for free, or you have a ton of Diplo with which to pursue a whole bunch of pacts on kind of these lower rung types of, they're a GP, but who's not a GP? Who's the biggest non-GP? You have a lot of extra Diplo with which to put in a bunch of subject interactions. If you're rivaling a bunch of stuff, you can guarantee independence, you can start bankrolling, you can, get whatever sort of investment agreement with a bunch of major powers to make it easier to pull them into your block, which makes sovereign empire, again, look a lot more appealing. So I think that this is a really significant change. Before I thought it was like sovereign empire is probably a little bit better, but trade league is really good. Now I have a hard time seeing anything other than sovereign empire being the best, unless of course you are doing it for flavor, which of course is a fine reason for doing the thing. But if we're talking about just what does good play look like, sovereign empire is absolutely insane now. In terms of rebalancing, probably the most significant change, and we've alluded to this before, is the change to taxation level effects. Before, it was highly increased radicalism from standard of living decreases, and this was the modifier before. As we've mentioned, that across the board has been removed in favor of other sorts of radicals from movements, or in this case, the very significant plus minimum expected standard of living, notably the minimum expected standard of living for the lower strata. I think it is no longer the case that very high taxes is very good at the opening of the game, because +5 minimum expected standard of living for the lower strata is very nearly doubling it. If you go high taxes and you do not have like 15 plus standard of living while having low literacy, because literacy increases the minimum expected standard of living kind of robustly, and so this is going to also make maybe pursuing high literacy bad, because if you have low literacy or lower literacy, you could run higher taxes more easily, but this makes it at the game's outset completely untenable to do very high taxes, I think. Unless I'm missing some sort of cheese to make this more available, and so I think the metagame is going to be high taxes if you have over 10 SOL, and medium taxes if you have under 10. Something like this. Although broad strokes, I'm saying that. I don't know it for sure. But also, this brings up the whole kind of back to the wages discussion, or the various effects we have on wages, which, as we mentioned, from the power block, religious convocation, divine economics, plus 25% wages for state religion pops. If you are feeding a bunch of extra wages to your lower rung pops by stacking plus wages modifiers, so there's 25% there, you can go state religion for plus 25%, or sorry, plus 10% wages for state religion pops. And then you could go, if you are relatively unicultural, if you go into national supremacy, let's say, which is available, plus 20% wage for the full acceptance class. And you really stack up, 55%. I think that's 55%. That's a lot of plus wages. That's probably going to increase SOL a little bit. Specifically, the lower strat is what we're really focused on here, because these increases to minimum are the minimum expected standard of living of the middle strata, the plus 3, proportionate to what their SOL is and what their target usually is much smaller than this 2.5. And so if you increase wages by a lot, you might be able to push yourself up to a level of SOL where you can run very high taxes comfortably. This, of course, combined with a sort of situation where you have a very progressive tax that is not targeting the lower strata very much, because we are only causing a lot of radicalism in particular with the lower strata with this. It's not that hard to get over 7 over the minimum expected standard of living for upper strata, I don't think. Although this isn't something I've taken an enormously close look at, but it is extraordinarily hard to do this by plus 5 on particularly the lower strata. It's just like, this is such a big deal. So on top of that, on top of running kind of this reduced level, the way you probably want to attack this is lowering government wages. So you can't run max taxes with like medium government wages or something like this, but instead you might be running like this at the outset. And I think that this is probably going to be one of the more significant changes. I maybe even should have put it at the front of the video, because this is a significant different thing that the player could introduce, but I wanted to talk about systems that were entirely new as much as possible at the front of the video. Another thing is there's been a rebalancing of some PMs. Notably, the two most notable, the completely unusable automobile PM is now looks pretty good, although it has the downstream effect of increasing demand for engines, so this is maybe something I need to take a closer look at. I haven't, but it in particular is going to automobile production produces 5 more cars, which have a base cost of 100, and it takes 10 less oil, which has a base cost of 300, so it went from producing, like, I think it was 100 marginal value to producing, like, 900 marginal value when all is said and done. It still increases the amount of laborers. I'm still not 100% sure on it, gotta take a closer look at it, but I think automobile production is back in, although some people said it never left, but those people are wrong. And then very also importantly, the much less ambiguous the much less ambiguous and much worse, Chainsaws PM was buffed. So now Chainsaws is it's not extremely good, but it is in line with other labor-saving PMs. It consumes a lot of oil. In particular, when you're just getting your oil industry up and coming, I actually think the PM is going to be excellent because it has relatively high demand for oil. And then if you're running oil shortages, you probably turn it off. And this is probably how you look at it. It has roughly 1/3 the cost of input goods, and it labor saves 2.5 times the amount of workers. And this is kind of just an indication of just how freaking bad they were before. Now it's like roughly, I think, a cost of £20 per 100 labor saved, instead of like 60 or something. So the PM has gotten much better and is now usable, alongside automobiles being usable. Also, I haven't taken a look closely at the numbers, but we did see in the changelog that these PMs, the synthetic plants, or maybe it was just the art silk, also got buffed. Previously, art silk was the only PM in the game that had negative efficiency, which was just kind of insane. And now it increased the machinists, decreased the laborers. The wood cost per level is not. It used to be like minus 30 dyes, plus 30 silks, plus 10 wood, which size and silk have the same base price, so this used to just cost extra money. Now I think softwood has a base price of 20, and I think both of these have a base price of 30, so it's going to be a marginal net of, let's see, we're adding roughly plus like 50% on this or whatever it is. This is going to be 300, 500, and then the output's going to be 900, so it's going to be an output of an additional 400 per level, and is not going to increase employment at all. It's just going to turn them into machinists. So Rayon is actually probably good. And I think a couple other PMs got changed. Automatic bottle blowers is maybe worth using now. I know that one got buffed as well. It consumes way less oil. All the glass PMs got changed a little bit. I think that they made it so you don't necessarily have to have some of your buildings being on glass focused, and you can instead turn on the luxury PM on all of them. This was something that you would have to micro prioritize glass production on some of these before, and I think they readjusted the numbers so that it is going to make sense to be always on bone china now for all of them, much like kind of how these other luxury PMs sort of worked before, like the furniture, where you would just have all on precision tools and this type of thing. So some other notable changes in terms of the PMs, there are just the big one is the big two are the chainsaws and the automobiles are now probably worth using contextually. Finally, subjects got changed in a couple of ways. The first one that is going to be relevant for most runs is now you can go straight from protectorate to vassal, which means you can annex countries that you subjugate in 5 fewer years, which is pretty significant. That you can do this, I believe, no matter what, when you annex them now, you get the very significant relation malice with all your other countries, but it is going to make the play pattern of subjugating to annexation a little bit more streamlined, a little better, which of course is just another kind of win in the column of the Sovereign Empire, because the Sovereign Empire in particular is going to, well, trust me on it, we can't pull it up, but it does give an additional bonus to reducing liberty, desire, and subjects, which is going to make this annexation sort of path a little bit easier when you are doing it more often. But also on the subjects, I think this is worth noting, although it won't be relevant for most runs. If you are playing EIC, you start out as the new subject type chartered company. And this isn't something we noticed in our EIC run, and you might be able to tell by us getting upset that this is pretty significant. You pay 40% income transfer to Overlord. And I don't know if chartered companies are going to be the companies that you found when you make a company with the journal interaction, but 40% is such a freaking big amount of all the income, 40% going in. So it went from a Dominion, paying 25% to now paying 40%. This is an enormous transfer, and in particular, it's going to make the UK way stronger, because the UK is going to build a bunch of buildings in the EIC, and then the EIC is going to before it becomes the Raj, the EIC is going to transfer so much money to Great Britain, it's going to be unreal. And I thought that this was just kind of worth pointing out, even though most of the time, the thing that's going to be much more relevant is you can protectorate to annex in a much, much shorter period of time now, because you don't have to do the additional step. And also, the fact that you don't have to do the additional step, when you raise we gotta find someone who we have not decreased autonomy on recently, but when you decrease autonomy, right, and you increase everyone's liberty desire, you only have to do that once before annexation per country instead of twice, and so you are going to be able to do this with more countries, and so it changes the expansion metagame a little bit in that you can annex a little bit more freely while staying on low infamy, and also when you turn and burn and go high infamy, you can kind of annex everyone who you've had to subjugate a little bit faster as well, so this is probably worth noting.